April, and writer-director Mary Lighton.
Oh boy. I was like sitting here watching this film again, and I was like, I don't know where to begin. But actually, I do know where to begin because thank you for giving us all Dursley's bottom. It's a whole different perspective. I'm super fascinated by your adaptation of the book, and maybe that's a good place to start. Is sort of what attracted to you, and sort of I know a lot of them has sort of shifted for the film, and maybe talk about that sort of process.
Yeah, I was set the book at like the very beginning of the pandemic, so that was what 2020, 2021, and I'd spent like most of my 20s working on a film about sumo wrestling in Tokyo, and then the pandemic happened and it wasn't possible, so I was kind of sulking, and then the head of the BBC, which BBC in England is known for like being great but a bit square, and then it sent me this book and it came with a note being like, I think you'll like this, and I read the book expecting it to be like a drama about accountancy, and it was like this like really filthy book, and it was really funny, and from sentence to sentence the book's tone kind of shifted, using a first person narration but in a way which I thought would make a really interesting challenge to translate into a film without voiceover. But the book's set in the 70s, it's set in this world of gay bikers but in the 70s in England, and I found that if it was set in the 70s, the answer to like Ray's mystery became less interesting to me because your head, or my head at least, goes to the kind of homophobic context of Britain at the time, and you go, oh well, he's definitely just closeted, and he has got a wife and kids somewhere or some reason for hiding himself. Whereas what I loved about the possibility of Ray was that actually his mystery could just be part of like an erotic game. It could just be the like kind of erotic frisson of anonymity. So I moved it to the present, and a lot of changes came about because of that. Like the parents were very different in the novel. The parents kind of sweep Colin's sexuality under the carpet, whereas I was really into the idea that his parents would start being like over accepting almost. The mum's kind of little bits of the mum are quite like my mum, who when I came out, she used to like cut out newspaper articles. Well, it wasn't even newspaper articles, it would be like a photo of Hugh Jackman. But then she'd like leave it on my bed with a note being like, you should date this guy. And she had high ambitions for her son. But yeah, so I thought it was an interesting question. If you have these really, usually in queer films, you go from kind of a queer kid not being accepted by their parents, so then maybe coming out and an acceptance at the end. And I thought, what if you like start with very accepting parents, but then their son gets a boyfriend whose like relationship model, his version of gayness doesn't match their expectations, and you can kind of ask a different question about what version of homosexuality is acceptable.
Right, and it's really fascinating because most of you don't know, the book Box Hill is set in the 70s, but shifting it out of that time period actually sort of frees you up to have these kind of narrative shifts from the book. And I think to allow the parents to be a very different kind of character. Without all the sort of baggage. Like you said in the 70s, then you have to do what is going on in the 70s, and what are these sort of things in queer culture that would make the film very different. And was there a temptation when you were adapting it to shift Ray? It's like make him, because he remains an enigma, and he does in the book as well, right? So you don't know him other than the literal character he's playing as the Dom. And was there any moment when you're like, should I give him, as you're writing the story, like, were you tempted to sort of tell Ray's anything about Ray?
I think I did so many versions of the script. One was like set in ancient Rome, one was set in cruise ship. It's like, I've done every version. It's like I've done the version where like Ray sits Colin down and goes, "This is why." Yeah. But whenever I tried to like answer the kind of why of Ray, I always instantly found them less interesting. And it was when Alexander came on board, I told him that I was like, you might have questions about Ray's background, but I'd rather not answer them. I don't know. You can work it out.
You can build the character.
Yeah, but he had a similar view to me, which was he said when he was reading the script, he was constantly like nervous that he was going to turn the page and then Ray was going to be saying, "I'm this way because of X." And yeah, I think that allowing Ray's mystery to remain a mystery, in retrospect, was the right choice.
Right. Because I feel like there would be a temptation once you dig into his character to sort of psychoanalyze, like, why is he like this? Like, the minute you open that door, you're going to have to explain everything. Oh, I have a terrible childhood, or whatever, you know, and it's sort of not having that actually makes it much more fascinating because.
Yeah, I think that also specifically with relation to like kink, often kink is given this kind of like Freudian root to it, and you know, I certainly don't think that's true of everyone who's involved in kink at all. So I was kind of very resistant to being like Ray is you know, certainly Ray's kinks, but also Ray's like version of a relationship is rooted in a specific trauma, say.
Right. And do you feel like, I guess this is I have two different paths I want to go down, but one about the casting sort of, but let's come back to that, because I think the idea of going into this community and your own personal research, that kind of also shore up why we don't need Ray. Like you sort of made the point where you don't want to have to psychoanalyze him, especially with the kink community where there's all this sort of pressure, like, why do you do it? Give me your reason. And did you sort of, in your own exploration of like digging into this community, did these kind of paths open up for you?
Yeah, I think like my main takeaway from I guess my research and my experience is that like it's such a broad church, you know, it's not one size fits all, and there's a million different, well, maybe a million's a lot, but a million different versions of Ray, or a million different like DOMs, all of whom have you know, their own ways of practicing and their own like, they might be able to root that sexual desire in something, but they also might not be. And so I wanted to just present like a character in Ray rather than have Ray be any sort of blueprint.
Right. And because I guess that leads back down to the casting. Like when you were pulling this together, I imagine when I first watched the movie, I was like, imagining the pitch session. I want to make this movie. Can you talk a little bit about that process when you were like, okay, this is the story I'm going to tell. Now give me money.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because the book was brought to me by the BBC, so they kind of knew in a way what they were getting. They knew they were getting to bed with. And you know, my answer when I read the book was that, you know, I loved the book, but I didn't want to do it if it was going to have to be diluted in this kind of deliberate way. But I was also, you know, told that it would be a very hard film to finance, so that like casting it would be kind of an integral piece of the pie. And you know, I actually, when I'm writing, I don't kind of think of cast. I sort of try and avoid it as much as possible because it just leads to disappointment. But in this case, it was kind of the opposite, where I didn't like.
So were you disappointed?
Well, I didn't dream big enough in a way. And like, I wanted to cast Colin first, so I saw Harry's work in The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, and you know, was just like instantly captivated by him, watched all his work, and was like, okay, this is Colin, and you know, I reached out to him and he said yes. But then with Ray, I've been watching Succession season 4, and yeah, I was enamored by Alexander, and that's kind of a creepy word, enamored. I was like, I just thought he was like the perfect combination of like a kind of mad physicality, but also psychological complexity. He kind of dominates the Roy Kids in that. But I also, you know, it was like the first time feature, very low budget, so I assumed it was just like a good example rather than someone we'd actually approach. And so I remember going to my casting director and being like, I want to find someone like Alexander Skarsgård. And she, but I was like, but I don't want to waste time sending the script out to him, and you know, it'll take a month to hear back, and he won't read it. And she was like, you know, you have to roll the dice occasion in life, and then send him the script, and yeah, he replied in like a day. So that was a real pinch me moment.
Well, he's known for sort of taking these kind of maverick roles too.
Yeah, well, the casting director, to kind of convince me that it was a waste of time, sent me his IMDb photo, which I don't know if you know it, but he's like black tie event, he's not wearing any trousers. So I was like, okay, maybe he's a bit of naughty.
And it's sort of amazing, and I wonder in terms of how you work with the actors, and that role could very easily be a caricature.
Yeah, which is kind of why his part in Succession I thought was such a you know, that's what drew me towards him, because I knew that you needed Ray to be someone who had like an impenetrable surface in a way, someone who's like very well practiced at embodying this sexual fantasy, but he'd be kind of a boring, you know, it goes back to what we're talking about his background. He'd be a very boring character to watch if you didn't think that there was a background. You need to believe that he does have this backstory, even though we're not going to tell you what it is. And me and Alexander did speak about planting moments across the film where you feel like you're seeing like a little chink in the armour, and just having faith that those moments would be enough.
Right. Because there's the moment, I love that sort of juxtaposition of there's the private moment where they go camping with all the members of their community, and then there's the moment they have being normal, quote unquote, like where it's sort of inconsistent, but it's them trying to be, but it also sort of still feels kind of fake, like they're trying to be some people that they're not. And I was curious if like that sort of combination was like where the appeal for these sort of characters are, like that's not their world.
Yeah, and I think you know, it's talking about people playing roles. There's like that day off. We called it the day off. That sequence where Ray, you know, puts on his like plaid shirt and his non-evers and heads into town to sing a song, and you know, Ray's embodied this kind of like Dom biker role for the whole of the film, but then like those sort of honeymoon sequences, which are kind of rooted in romantic comedies, they're also about people, you know, dating. You're always like embodying a role, and like if you're going to be like the good date, if you're going to offer your popcorn to your date, it's all performance in a way. So I wanted that date to feel like a different kind of performance, but also to have a different kind of visual texture to it. You know, a lot of the film to that point has had like a kind of varnish, and we shot that day off sequence on the high street of Bromley, and you know, we didn't have enough money to kind of close down a high street and fill it with extras, so we just hid cameras in like the shop windows, and like there was one in like a guitar speaker. We had like a fake guitarist, and so we just chucked Harry and Alexandra onto the high street, and all the people you see in those scenes are, you know, normal people. They're not extras, and then occasionally come and like interact with the actors. But I think it gives this sort of everydayness to those scenes, which separate them from the kind of stuff you've seen before.
Yeah. There's a moment that I said to my friend I'm here with that when Ray comes down the stairs and he's in Colin's sleeping. I said, Ray's wearing slides. I was like, that was the most normal like part of it. Like,
I think someone said to me the other day, you know it's over when you see his sliders. I don't disagree.
There's some question too about, I was thinking in the kind of the truthiness of the camping, like that community, and I wonder if your own like sort of experience, like in wanting it to be very spot on, right, and do that community justice. I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I always wouldn't. I didn't want to be kind of like bound by fact, because you know, it's hard to always like represent a very broad community with one. So I wanted to like leave room for fiction, but and you know, there's not actually like a bike gang in England who exists purely in this kind of biker pillion pairs where all the pillions are bottoms. But I did want to like know the facts for myself, so that I was very knowledgeable when I was moving away from them or when I wasn't. So you know, part of it was going in. I went and met up with the GBMCC, this massive gay bike club in the UK, and kind of rode around with them for a weekend and just chatted to all of them, and then cast them in the film off the back of that. And you know, all those bikers, other than Alexandra and Harry and Jake Shears from the Scissor Sisters, are people from that bike club, or people from the London King scene. And by casting them, you know, I'd go and chat to each one individually and talk about their characters, and then kind of bring their own selves into it. So like, if you take the pup in the film, Paul, he didn't have a pup in the script, but I went and met up with him in a pub in London, and he bought his pup mask and was like, you know, I'd love to represent this part of the culture in the film. And so I said, go off and tell me how you do that. And he sent me like a 6,000 word email about like Paul's version of it. Was like Paul the Pup film, and Ray and Colin were very much sidelines, but all those guys were like, it's so generous in the way they approached the project, and having them like come out to the premiere in Cannes and you know, seeing like a pup mask in a cinema in Cannes was like a real highlight of my life.
It's a negotiation. I know getting into the cinema at Cannes
You
is
just
quite
hear it.
difficult.
You just sort of stuffed it under his shirt and then whacked it on in the
As long as you
film.
have the right pants on, I think as long as your tuxedo works, that's all I care about. Oh God, what was the questions I had about, because there's this, I guess my thought was, did you yourself have sort of concerns when you took the first cut? And it's not, I would not call this a graphically queer film, but it has elements that would probably make normal, like, I hate to say that word, but like a traditional audience probably uncomfortable at certain moments. And are there moments in your mind where you're like, should I?
I'm very disappointed you don't find it graphic. I
have to say, I watched a lot of screeners for this year's festival, and it's by the least graphic film.
Fair enough. The script was like, deliberately, the script I wrote was like extremely graphic because I didn't want anyone who financed it to be under any kind of illusion. So there was like generally was like a 5-paragraph description of resurrection in the script, which you don't see a 5-minute shot of in the film. But all of the kind of, there was a sort of rumor, but like a bit of misinformation where some journalist wrote that we'd done like a cut for the Europeans and a cut for America, which isn't true. But what is true is that there was a shot which was in the very first director's cut, which was just like a close-up of the Prince Albert, like a real close-up. It would have filled the screen. And it was in the alley scene, the first blowjob scene, and it was when Ray unzips and pulls out his knob. And
It's a very quick cut.
Yeah, well, but the reason it wasn't because I was sort of being prudish. It was because it made the audience, we did a test screening, the audience like laughed at that moment, and you want the audience to be holding their breath with Colin. You know, when the cock comes out, that's when Colin stops, kind of smiling widely and starts being like, oh God, I'm trying to do this well. And so it just was the wrong beat at the wrong moment.
Right. And the film, like to your point, the film is surprisingly funny. And like, was this sort of one of your goals when you're writing? Like it can very easily tip into this sort of melodrama about this couple, but it's just so funny.
Yeah, it definitely was one of the goals. I found the book really funny, and I thought that like the book was funny because of Colin's voice, but I thought there was ways of trying to translate that voice into image, which would. I think comedy is a great way of like inviting an audience into a character and creating empathy. And for like audience members who maybe aren't familiar with this world, it makes it harder, I think, for them to distance themselves from the character if they have been laughing with them one moment. So the idea was that like if you had a moment which made them chuckle, and then the next moment there was something which made them kind of gasp. They wouldn't just leave the cinema.
Yeah. And it's strange because it's not, I think it doesn't hit like a parody. Like it's funny, but it's not making fun of them. Like, because they are these absurd, I mean, the humor comes out of these sort of absurd moments, but you're not lampooning it, right? You're acknowledging this, it's kind of absurd, but you're all like, I'm in for the ride.
Yeah, it's the classic thing of, not like trying to make the audience, I think there's moments where we do laugh at Colin, but I think hopefully over the course of the film, that laughter also creates a real empathy with him, and so by the end, no one's in any doubt that we're like with Colin and rooting for him.
There's that shot, the pan shot, where he finally sort of comes into his subness, and he's at work, and people are just yelling and screaming at him, and he doesn't even faze it. It's such a great shot. Talk a little bit about like the reaction. I know the press for this film since Cannes has been through the roof, and has this sort of been a sort of wild press journey. I mean, we probably all heard about the film long before we even saw like shots of like trailers.
It's been totally crazy. I think Alexander's red carpet looks have something to do with the sustained interest in it. But yeah, it's at every stage it's kind of surprised me in a way, the reaction of the film, because we did Cannes and it went down well there, and then we came to America and premiered at Telluride, and I was told it's quite it can be quite stuffy, and they were a really noisy crowd. Like someone was like swearing at the screen while someone like next to them was swearing at them, and it was, so at every step of the way I've been like, it made me reconsider maybe my own like prejudices about audience, I guess, in that, I wondered if like the film would only find an audience with a very like niche, knowledgeable crowd, and my mum's been howling from the back of the cinema.
Was there a moment when you start the rollout, because it's not, I mean, this is a career-sponsored event, but it's like hitting mainstream, that's like mainstream release. So was there a lot of conversation about a film that is this queer going, especially, I mean, considering the time we're living in now, and maybe the time when you started writing, like, lots of things have changed, especially in America. And I was curious if this is something that you thought about. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of discussions about this kind of thing.
You know what I mean? Maybe I'm not party to some of those discussions, but like the kind of ambition from our distributors in the US, A24, has always been pretty like, we want to get this film out there, and I think like the kind of political present makes it a very interesting time to put a film like this out there, because if it finds an audience, and if it can kind of encourage empathy with like a marginalized group of people, then it's a good sort of rejoinder to the people who are kind of throwing back on queer rights.
Yeah, I mean, it's just an interesting moment for the film to arrive. Not that I'm excited, because I think we need more films like this that are given the push that a company like A24 can do, rather than sort of more indie films that just kind of struggle to get seen. So it's kind of great to have this kind of story actually go wide.
Yeah, well, let's hope it goes wide. I think it's only played in like 4 cinemas so far, but cross my fingers.
Although I do have to say, I saw the press release and I was like, you're opening in Little Rock, Arkansas, before you open in Boston. I was kind of annoyed by that. And the reaction has been you attended most of the preview screenings that you can, or I know they got you on a whirlwind.
Yeah, I feel sort of, I've never really been to America before this film. In fact, I hadn't been to America, and now I'm doing the grand tour and loving it. But I went to Washington DC for this thing called Mid-Atlantic Leather, which is the second biggest leather convention in the States. And that was an experience. There was like 5,000 guys in harnesses watching the film and having a great time.
What is kind of one of the audience's reactions that stuck with you, like in this period, like something that?
Good question. I mean, my dad's was funny, I guess. My dad, I had lots of lovely messages from people saying that they felt seen and all that. But my dad watched it for the first time in London at the London Film Festival, and he just kind of came up to me afterwards and was like, good film, I need to watch it again to understand the nuances.
One more time. And it was a prosthetic, wasn't it?
I don't reveal the magic of but, it's
I'm sure we're a little period. Should we, I think we have the time to do we have one more.
Oh yeah, so we have to give you the actual Breakthrough Artist Awards.
Well, thank you very much.
So we got